And hello and welcome. My name is Martin, and today we're going to be covering the second part of the tutorial. Now, between the first video that I made for this and the second video that I've made for this, I've actually found a slightly better way of doing the jumping to where it was not as complicated. In this situation, all we are going to need are going to be the trigger boxes that we are going to put some pretty fancy code in, and then we will need to erase one or two things that we did to our Murdoch character. Now, the reason why I'm doing this is because in my head I've always had a jump system, a way that I like characters to jump. The problem here is that I have a difference in height, and then here I have a difference in length. So what was happening with the jump stuff the jump code that I was going to show you in this was that it would work from one platform to another platform, but when the distance changed and the acceleration that you needed to be able to make the jump changed, all of a sudden the characters were not able to make it to the second platform. They could jump freely back and forth between the first two, but if I was going to add that second layer or a third platform, then it was becoming too much for the code that I had given it. Either all the platforms had to be equal distance from each other, or the situation wouldn't have worked. So if you do have a situation where there is going to be different platforms or different lengths and different heights for each one of these platforms, and you need this to be able to get to that and that one to be able to get to here, then we will need to have unique code in each one of the trigger boxes to let the character know how far they actually need to jump and how long that's going to take. Okay, so I think the easiest thing would be to first, let's go back into our Murdoch character. So let's double click on them and let's open up the blueprint, because we really don't have to go any further than the blueprint. And in the last tutorial I said that we were going to set up an event overlap, and then that was going to create our jump event, and I had set that up underneath the shoot projectile. Just select everything and hit delete on that. We are actually going to, the character can theoretically already jump, but we're not triggering it from the character. We're going to trigger it from the box, okay? Because the character by default can already jump. If you click on character movement and click jump, which is actually where we need to go next, you'll see obviously that the character can. They are able to. You can see right here, movement capabilities can jump. So underneath that is available. Now what we want to do is we want to take our jump Z velocity and bring that back down. So if you've got this little guy right here, go ahead and click that, and that should put that back to normal. And then underneath, and go ahead and do the same thing for just about everything in the jump command. We just want to set everything back to normal. Not that it's going to make a difference, because in the code that we're going to write, it's going to override any velocity values that are found inside the character when the character gets launched from one platform to the other platform, which is the term that we're going to use. So once you've done that, so remember what we've done is we've erased the jump code, the overlap to jump, and we have come over here to character movement and selected or typed in the word jump, scroll down and reset everything back to quote-unquote factory settings, right, for this character. So with that, we can hit compile and save, and everything else is done. You don't have to change anything with your jump boxes, and those are actually still going to be used for this code. All we're doing again is changing the velocity value away from the character and moving it to the trigger box so it's unique for each one of the trigger boxes. Alright, so with that said, what we're going to do now is we are going to set up our first trigger box. Now I'm going to leave the two that are there because I don't want to have to rewrite the code for those, and you'll see why in a second. So what we want to do is let's type up here trigger box, okay, or box trigger. Select one of your box triggers, grab that, put it on the floor, and let's resize that so that it actually fills out the space that we need it to. Again, when you make these things, you're going to see kind of like a little button in the middle. Kind of looks like a button on an old arcade system. Make sure that you can see that, so then that way you don't have to grab the edge of the box. You can just select the icon for the button. And then the other thing that I also want to do is make sure that especially when they're jumping up, you have to think that velocity is going to kick in. And actually, you know what's really neat about this velocity is it really shoots them straight up and over. So you can actually put this fairly close to the edge, but you do want to make sure that at least part of it is going over the navigation mesh area. Otherwise, the character won't ever be able to run into the box itself. Okay, so once the box has been made and it's been sized, now we need to go ahead and drop our code in there. So what we'll notice is over here on the details panel, if you have the box selected, you have add component, and you also have the ability to be able to add a blueprint. So let's go ahead and create one, and it's going to ask us where do we want to stick this. So you can create a new folder and put all your blueprints in there, or I've already got a folder that's called My Stuff. I've actually got a few of them now, and I'm going to go, I guess, into the first My Stuff, create the blueprint, and if we go back to Contents, My Stuff, you'll see right there that the trigger box blueprint. Now, if you needed to, we are actually going to make several blueprints because each one of these blueprints is going to have a different destination code, and it's going to have a different time jump duration. And those two things are going to be crucial to the code that we're going to build. So unfortunately, if all the distances are different, then each one of the boxes need to be unique. Now, if you do have platforms that have, let's say, the same amount of distance, like this one to this one is 10 units long, this one to this one is 10 units long, this one to this one is 10 units long, well, even then you would still need to have new code or new boxes for it because the destinations for each one of these is going to be different, because you have to tell, and we'll see it in the code, you have to actually tell when the character runs in, it has to pick up where the character's position is and where you want the character to go. Where do you want them to end up after the jump, right? So where's the start and the end point for these things. Okay, so with that said, we now have our new box on the floor. We've already created the blueprint. We've seen where that blueprint is, and if we wanted to, we could obviously come here and give this thing a unique name, like maybe I'm going to call this thing, oops, let's go this way, BP for short, and we'll call this one, that's trigger box, let's say this is trigger box 1. Unfortunately, I already have a trigger box 2. I would have probably liked to have done this in order. So this would have been 1, that one would have been 2. This one would be 3. But as it is, that one's 1, this one's 2. So this one will be 3. So let me go back in. Oops. Let's go back in there and rename this before we go back and open it. So we can say something like that. Trigger B3 BP. So trigger box 3, it could even be as short as TB3 BP. So then that way at least you have a unique name for each one of your trigger boxes. Okay, so you can enter the code by double clicking on the trigger box, or if you have the object selected, like if I go to this one and hit edit blueprint, it will then send me to the blueprint, or if I click here, once I've got a blueprint, I can say edit blueprint and then open the blueprint editor and do it just like that. Now it's going to obviously take you into the viewport, and what we want to do is go into the event graph. So we're going to go ahead and delete the 3 objects that are there. And the crazy thing is that the very first thing that we need to do with this is, before we can do anything else really, is to create our first function. Okay, so basically what a function is like a mathematical equation that you're going to use to be able to give you whatever value you're looking for. So if this was a video game about rocket science, you know, the functions would be a bunch of rocket science equations. And in fact, this one feels really close because we are getting, it's almost calculus. We're getting trajectory, we're getting start point, end point, we're going to have velocity. So there's going to be quite a few things. It seems more complicated than it is. Once you see the equation written out, you'll be like, oh, well, that makes sense. But for us, for right now, it's going to be quite a bit. All right, so the first thing we want to do is go underneath functions, and we're going to want to create a new function. Let's go ahead and call this calculate velocity. Okay. So now that we have calculate velocity, we will see that we have the beginning of the function. So this is the stuff that we're going to input into the function, then we're going to do some math, and then we're going to have an output part of the function. So for the input part of the function, let's go into inputs, and we're actually going to need to generate 3 of these. Okay. The first one is going to be called destination location. And what this is going to do is give us the value of where we want the character to end up. We are also going to need to turn this into a vector, so then that way we get an X, Y, and Z coordinate for that. The next one is going to be starting location. Fingers are moving faster than they should. So staring location, starting location. This also needs to be a vector for obvious reasons. It's a location, we need the X, Y, and Z. Now for the last one, what we're going to do is we're going to type in duration. Okay, and duration is going to be how long, and obviously this is going to need to be not a Boolean because we don't need a true or false, but we need it to give us a float value, which is a number. So if we can now type in there 1, which would be 1 second, 2, which would be 2 seconds, 10, which would be 10 seconds, right? All right, so from there we need the output of what this is going to give us as an equation. So let's go ahead and hit the plus parameter there again, but this time underneath outputs, and this we're going to call velocity. Velocity. Okay, and we're going to put this in as a vector value because because essentially we're going to need the X, Y, and Z values for this because velocity is going to be measured off of two distances and how far you got to those distances. Okay, so from here, the next thing that we need to do is we are actually going to need to create a variable and a local variable. So variables are things that are going to be a part of the whole box, and local variables are going to be things that are only going to be part of the calculation. Okay, so local variable we only need inside of the function that we're creating, and variables will be able to be seen outside of this function. So let's go ahead and create one variable. The first one, we're going to need this one to say jump duration. Okay, and this is going to need to be a float because it's going to be a number. The other thing that this is also going to need to be is we are going to need to create our own category for this. And if you click on the categories, you will see, actually you'll see nothing right now because this function doesn't have any categories. So we will type in jump. But when we go back into our character, we're actually going to see this show up in the details panel, which is really neat. So this now becomes its own category inside the details panel. From there, we can't assign a value yet because we don't have the equation yet, and even if we hit compile and save, we would get multiple values because we have multiple pins open that don't have anything in them at the moment. Okay, so that's jump duration, but we'll come back to that in just a second. And then the next one is going to be local variable, and this one we're going to say in duration. And this we're going to be sticking all over this piece of this function that we're creating because it's going to give us the variable of time inside of our X, Y, and Z. So this is going to be the time variable. This is going to be how long we're giving the jump ability, but this will be the time variable in the X, Y, and Z because to calculate velocity you need time and distances. So vectors and floats that are time. All right, so now that we have this, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab one of the in durations. We're going to set an in duration, and we're going to click and drag that in between these two places. Okay, for right now, follow with me. Don't worry about exactly why we're doing things. When you see the whole equation, it'll start to make more sense. Right now, we're just sort of penciling in some things. From the destination location, we're going to need to go in and type in break vectors so we can get both the X, Y, and Z axis for that. We're going to do the same thing for the bottom one. So both of our starting destination and our destination location should be there. And we are then going to take our duration value and put it into the set. Okay. Now from there, we need to actually get the value, we need to subtract the values of the x's from each other and the y's from each other. So we need to know the difference between where they're starting, you know, how much space is there between this and this, and how much space is there between y and y. So what we're going to do is drag off of the first x, and we're going to just hit the minus key on your keyboard. You could also theoretically type in float minus float, because that is what we were looking for. And what this is going to do is basically like you taking a pencil on a piece of paper and saying one number minus another number. And we are going to then connect the x value to this. We are going to do another one of these, so I'm going to hit Control-C, Control-V to duplicate that. And then I'm going to combine both of the y values. Okay, so I'm taking the top vector, the starting, and you have to put them in these order, otherwise it's not going to work. So you need to make sure that you're doing this in the correct order. So I'm just trying to make it look nice. Okay, so now that we have that, the next part of this is going to be dividing these two values from the duration individually. And again, let me just line this up. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag off of this value. I can hit the / on my keyboard, or I can type in float divided by float. And I will now get the, sort of like what we saw with the minus, another math equation. But with this time on the bottom number, we are going to put in the in duration. So, you know, how long is this going to take? This time we're going to get a get, and we're going to attach that to the bottom part of this. Again, I'm just straightening them up. Okay. And you can guess what we're going to do here. We're going to do another one of these, Control-C, Control-V. And I'm going to attach that to the bottom. Okay, so now we have it that we're taking both of the x values, subtracting them from each other, both of the y values, subtracting them from each other. And then we're taking the answer to the subtraction and dividing that by the duration, by how much time we're going to make this thing stay in the air. Now, all of this is great, but we still have not done anything. We're almost there, but we still have not done anything with our z values. Now the z value is going to be different because the z value is going to be the character jumping into the air, and there has to be an arc to this. So depending on how far the jump is, the arc is going to change, and so because of that we need a slightly different formula for the z values. Now, with the z values, what we're going to do is we're going to take the starting location, and we are going to add that. So if you hit the plus button on your keyboard, or you say float plus float, okay, so now we have the add value. And then we're going to take the square root of the duration, multiply it by 0.05, and then multiply that number by Earth's gravity. So the number that they gave me, and again, I'm not going to pretend like I understand why these numbers are these numbers, but they said that the gravity of Earth is one, like the feeling of the gravity would be 1 point something something. If you put that into a curve, then you get some trigonometry, and the number that they gave me was 298. So we'll plug that number in. All right, so what we'll need to do is off of the bottom rung, as soon as my autosave is done. Okay, so on the bottom rung down here, we're going to take that out, and what you want to do is hit your asterisk, which should give you your float times float. And remember that I said there were going to be 3 values that we need to multiply together, so we need to add an additional pen. We are again going to get the in duration value. We're going to set that. We're going to get that, not set it. And then I'm going to click and drag out, and I'm going to type in the word square. This is going to give me the square. It's going to square the value of the duration, and it's then going to we're going to then attach that to the top part of the equation. Now this number down here is going to be -0.5, and the bottom value is going to be 298. I'm sorry. Wow, dyslexia is fun. 982. Okay, so now what we're saying is the z value from the starting point, we're going to add this math to it. We're going to take the duration, square it, multiply that by, and I almost messed up, that needs to be a -0.05. and we'll hit enter, so that takes place, or hit tab, so it goes to the next one, it stays in there. So negative, make sure that it's a negative 0.05, and multiply that by 982. Now we got the starting part of this equation. We now need to connect that with the other z, as we've seen, and we're going to do the same thing that we did with these values. We're going to subtract them. So we're going to subtract the answer from the first z from the second z. So I'm going to click off of the first z. I'm going to hit the minus on my keyboard. I'm going to hit float to float. I'm going to attach the bottom equation, and I'm subtracting the top z from the bottom z, or the destination locations z from the starting location z. And then again, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to divide this out by its duration. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select all of those and hit Q so that they're nice and straight. And we need another one of these, so I'm going to hit Control C, Control V. I'm going to then attach that to the top there, and you can pretty much guess where this is going. Now the thing is that we only have one value up here, we have 3 values down there, so what we're going to do is right click on this and say split structure pin. That will then give us the X value, the Y value, and the Z value. Okay, so now that part of the equation is done. We're going to go ahead and hit compile and save. And if you go to, I believe it's jump duration now, you can actually go in there and, let's say, give the duration a value that was not available before. Remember, well, we didn't actually see it because we never hit compile while we were here. And then obviously once you've made the change, hit compile again and hit save. But I've seen it where it says multiple outputs or multiple inputs, and it couldn't give me a value because these things were open. Anyways. So now we have our equation. So we're basically saying start value, end value, or the start location, end location. We're going to do some math with the x, with the x, y, and z's. We're going to find, and this will then allow us to be able to create or change the gap in the distance because it's calculating the distance. Remember that I said earlier when we started this video that the problem I was having was that the velocity had to be changed between one platform and the next platform. Well, guess what? We now have an equation that calculates velocity between 2 different points. Fantastic, right? And that we can plug in our own duration so that we can actually get bigger jumps or smaller jumps, or sometimes not jumps big enough. All right, so once that's there, we are now finished with this piece of the code. And what we need to now do is go into the event graph. Again, we're still in the trigger box, so we're still in trigger B3, and let me close the other ones out so that you're not seeing any of this stuff. Okay, so we're still in trigger B3, the blueprint for that. Now, obviously we have a collision box that's here. We're going to need to go ahead and change the collision box value because when it comes in, it's set up as a collision preset trigger. And that's fine, but remember that we set up one that was called jump trigger. And this is actually the one that we want because we don't want this box interacting with anything else except for the jump AI, anything labeled jump AI, and that will then trigger an overlap effect. And if we double click on our character and open up their blueprint and go to their viewport, remember that's what we stuck at their feet. We put a jump box, or we put a collision box, called it jump box, and went down to its collision settings, and it is now labeled as jump AI. And this is the only thing that this box is going to interact with, is something called jump AI. So when I, as the first person player, touches this box, my character won't automatically jump over to this other location. I'll be able to walk right off of the box, this edge, without being affected by the box trigger, whereas the other characters will be able to or they will be affected by the box and indeed jump. Okay, so with that selected, we can now go to right click in the event graph, click on add event for collision component. Collision is what we're looking for. Add component begin overlap. Okay, now from here there may be different actors and we may need to set them to different set this to interact with different actors or different characters that we have on the screen. All right, so to get this going then, if you were just going to set it up to one character, you would not need to obviously put the sequence in here, but since I've said that, we're going to go ahead and add one because we're going to make this work for 2 of my characters. Okay, so I'm going to type in sequence, and that will then give me the ability to be able to send this to one character and then to the next character, and if I need multiple characters, I can do this. Click on the pin and then say remove, click on the pin, remove, click on the pin, remove. Okay, so the first character that we have is going to be our Marduk BP. So we're going to right click off of this. We're going to say cast to Marduk. Am I not spelling that right? Oh, okay, that's fine. Okay, so I wouldn't spell it. I put an A there instead of a U. Cast to Marduk BP because we want this to affect the character. Remember that the jump component or the character movement is inside the character blueprint, so you have to have that one there. Now from there we need to attach other object to cast BP, so then that way it knows that this is the component that it's going to be interacting with. From there we are going to put in our calculate velocity, so we need to calculate the character's velocity. Okay, once the velocity is in there, obviously the starting location is going to be the character's blueprint, but we can't connect that directly to location, I don't believe. So what we'll need to do is get actor location. So we're going to right click, type in get actor location, add that in there, and that does then give us a value that will, or a node that will allow us to be able to connect the target to a location. Now duration, you could go in and grab, you could go in there and add a duration. Sorry, that needs to be visible. And then you could put one of these and add duration in there. Now the duration would then be coming from the value that you have attached to the default for this code, which is fine, but I find that since we're setting up multiples of these, we're going to leave this duration alone because maybe some characters are heavier, some characters are lighter, some characters for whatever reason aren't jumping the length that they need to. So you might, one character might need to be 1.5, the other character might need to be 1.7, one character might need to be 2 on duration just to make their jump look unique and special, right? And remember, since this is being cast to the Marduk character, this duration will be unique to the Marduk character. All right, and then the last part of this, obviously we need to set up a destination, so I'm going to go find the points where I want the character to end up on, and we'll do that in just a second. And the last part of this is going to be a new function, which is going to be called launch character. Now, if you have the case sensitive on, you're not going to see it. So if you take the case sensitive off, you will then see launch character. The velocity is going to be the launch velocity, which is coming from the output. Remember, that's why we need a velocity to be an output, because we were going to, remember I said it was going to go into a vector input. We want to override the X, Y, and the Z value for the character itself while it's going to launch. So we didn't necessarily have to go back into the character's movement, jump, and reset everything back to 0, but I just thought it would be better since there was no reason for it to be anything other than what it was before. So this will now give us the new launch velocity, and the only thing we need to do now is attach the target, and the target is going to be back here with the Marduk, and we're going to put that there. Now this kind of looks a little ugly because it's going through, so what I'm going to do is on the line, see how when I highlight it or I hold my mouse over it, it kind of highlights itself. I'm going to double click, and okay, now my mouse is stuck. Meh. Okay, and what that if you try to grab the dot that I just made, it's not going to grab it. If you grab just next to the dot, it's actually going to grab the object and move it. And all we're doing here is adding sort of like a way to kind of rope this around the other value so that it's not directly under it, so you can kind of see the connection without actually needing it to I don't know, it's just a nice way to like kind of move your line out of the way so that you can see the rest of what you're working on. Okay, so essentially this is done. We should now have a character. Oh, we need to get the destination location. So let's go ahead and add that. So to get the destination location, remember this is the trigger box that's on this side. I want the character to jump back up here. So what I like to do is I can grab the character if they're close, or an object that's close by, put it roughly where I want the character to land. And the best thing for this is the middle of the pad, honestly, the platform that you're going to be moving this onto. So now I can, with the character selected, I can see that I have my location right there. So now I can just click on the first number, hit Control C, and go back to the blueprints and plug that into that value. Hit Tab. Now to make this a little bit easier, you could kind of set them up side by side, sort of like this. Sorry, I'm using a split screen, so it's not catching the edge over there. All right. So I got the character selected on one side. I have their location values right there, and I have the equation that I'm going to be plugging this into. So now it's just a matter of copying and pasting. Okay, I don't need all those extra stuffs on the back. Okay, and all right. So let's take a look at this one more time. All right. So let's do this for the second character very quick. We're going to do the same thing. Run off of cast 2, and I think we were calling this oh, my other guy is called Raven. Okay, so now I'm going to attach this to a second character. Essentially I can copy all of this code, hit Control C, come down, hit Control V, and then just connect everything. So that to that to this back to there. It looks like everything else is back there is the same, and all we need to do now is attach other actor to object. Okay, so now we have that same code available for a second character, right? So, you know, and obviously you may have multiples of the same character, so that's not the same thing. Remember that the cast to the Murdoch BP is sending it to anything that has that BP as its blueprint. So if you have multiple versions of that character on the floor, like maybe there's 2 or 3 of them, you don't need to add a new one for each one of those characters. All you have to do is have one for each one of the major blueprints, right? So now if I hit compile and save, and I'm going to go to my Murdoch character and hit save because I don't know if I made any changes to them. Okay, and let's open this up and let's pull this back. Okay, and now we're going to test our duration time. I have found that 2 seconds is usually good enough, but I've usually been jumping off of things, not onto things. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put this character down here on the floor, or I'm going to put Murdoch on the floor, and I'm going to put myself up at the top. So then that way when he sees me, he's going to start coming towards me, and I'm going to rotate myself so then that way I can see him without having to do too much when I first start the game. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and push play, and we're going to see if Murdoch will actually jump up towards us. And of course, okay, he did indeed go to the other one. So I am thinking that, let's see, did I forget to put, let's go and check the collision box. So that's a jump trigger. It is generating an overlap effect. Oh, we didn't put in a duration value for either one of these. Okay, So again, if it doesn't have a duration, the velocity doesn't work, and so the whole code doesn't work. So let's type in 2 for that character, 2 for this character, and that almost was 20. So, whew, that was close. Let's hit compile and save, and now let's see if this doesn't work the second time. Okay, hopefully he doesn't go and trigger that other box. There we go. Character jumps. Almost made it. So with this character, it looks like we're going to need to give it a little bit more than 2 seconds because it failed in making the jump. Okay, so let's go back to that trigger box. We're going to open up its blueprint, open up Blueprint Editor, and this time let's give it a duration of 3 and 3. I'm just changing the values on all of them because I assume that, you know, most of my characters' gravities are all working the same way, so I don't have to come up with a new value for that. Okay, so let's test that again now. Okay, character went the wrong way, and that is actually what we're going to talk about in our next video because this video is way too long at this point. Let's go ahead and push play, and let's see if we can't get the character to chase us. There we go. They jumped. 3 minutes was a huge jump. Okay, we might not need a 3-minute jump because you could see that the character jumped way up into the air on that. So let's say 2 is too little. Let's go 1.5, and let's do, I'm sorry, 2.5, 2.5. Let's hit compile, save, and do the test again. See if this doesn't give us a more reasonable jump. Okay, 2.5 was still really big because remember it's getting squared. So let's do 2.1, 2.1, and again remember these values are going to change, and I'm just showing you how I'm going back into the equation and where I'm making the changes to make the character jump bigger or not jump that big. So let's push play again, and let's see if the 2.1 was big enough for the character to be able to. I feel like if he had jumped in the right direction, that that would be okay. So let's try that again. Let's push play, and let's see if we can't get the character to jump this way. Platform, and did he make it? Where'd he go? Oh wow. So he hit one of these, landed on that one, and then that one made him land over here, and then he ended up way over there. Okay, so that was kind of cool. He ended up like a bumper boat. So the 1.2 is obviously not big enough because it made him land on this as opposed to landing on the platform itself. So let's try a 2.3. And let's give that a shot, and let's see if that allows him to clear the other one without jumping all over the place like a bumper boat. And you notice also that my character is not being affected by this. Okay, so let's push play. So we can't turn him in our direction. Maybe that'll make him move a little bit faster towards us. That was tremendously strange. Let's try that again. Okay, so 2.3 made it work. He's jumping there. That made him work on this platform. Let's see if we can get him to go one more platform. Okay, so we see him jumping back over to that one. He jumped from that one to this one. And yeah, so 2.3 is still not going to be good enough. So we might need to leave it on that 2.5. And I think, okay, so he jumped over to this one. So he's doing a pretty good job of jumping and following us for the most part. He, again, does not have a platform or a trigger box on that one, so now he is stuck on that platform. He's not going to be able to go from there. So again, when you're doing this, we've obviously learned something here about having the boxes maybe a little bit too close together, giving them a little bit more space. You can see the kind of jumping that you can create with this. Now the only thing we'll do in the next tutorial is we'll create a couple of blocking volumes, and we'll make sure that the character can't actually jump anywhere where they're not supposed to. Now that we can actually get them jumping individually with different velocities between one platform and the other platform. So again, just remember that as you're moving them, to give them enough distance to be able to get all the way to the end, so then that way their velocity actually gets them to the destination without hitting another trigger. So obviously if these platforms were much longer, that would not be a situation. He would not be able to jump here, hit this one, and then hit that one and end up over there. All right, so hope you guys enjoyed the video. Again, the function was kind of a little difficult. I think it's cool because we now have the ability to be able to set different durations for different characters with different velocities between different platforms, and you can have a lot more freedom as opposed to just making everything exactly the same length, so that way it'll fit your code. You can actually do better design this way. Okay, so you guys have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.